That's a normal line to say.
Oh, I actually think that would close.
Hello, my name is Alanis King, and this right here is a 2007 Aston Martin DB9. This V12 Grand Tour was revolutionary for Aston Martin, and when the owner drove it into the parking lot today, it had such a presence. It was so cool. It just commands your attention. I cannot wait to tell you about this car today. But first, I should tell you that this Aston Martin DB9 is now available on Cars and Bids. You can check out more photos, see the full spec list, or maybe even bid on it at the link in the description of this video. You might remember that my friend and colleague Kennan drove an Aston Martin DB9 recently. Kennan said in that video that he selfishly booked a DB9 because he wanted to drive one. And I did the same thing. I figured if we couldn't get enough of the DB9, y'all probably couldn't either. Kennan's video focused on the design and engineering of the DB9 specifically, so I figured we would use our time today to discuss the history of the DB series as a whole, how we got to where we are today, where we go from here. We're gonna go deep into DB history today, but if you ever need a quick reference word format guide on the DB series, Road and Track wrote a really good history of it a few years ago. DB stands for David Brown, the name of an English businessman who bought Aston Martin for £20,000 in the late 1940s. I put that into a British inflation calculator, and I want you to guess how much that is today. That's right, £643,000. In 2020, billionaire Lawrence Stroll paid $182 million for a 16.7% stake in Aston Martin, which is a huge difference. Back to the 1940s, David Brown also bought Lagonda, which was making V12 limousines, sports cars, and all kinds of other vehicles. His initials became the basis of some of Aston's most famous models. And honestly, I think it's pretty cool. I'd put my name on everything if I could. The DB lineup began in 1948 with a 90 brake horsepower car called the 2-liter Sports. The 2-liter Sports became known as the DB1 later, and it had a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, as you could probably tell from the name. It also won the 24 Hours of Spa in 1948. Aston only made 15 2-liter Sports. So this car is very, very rare. One went up for auction at Bonhams in late 2022 and it sold for $210,000. Then in 1950, we had the DB2, which had that long hood and far back seating position just like the DB1. The DB2 had a straight 6 from Lagonda and it could go more than 100 miles an hour. Another version of the DB2 was the DB2-4, which had 2 rear seats. One of these sold on Bonhams recently for 155,000 euros. And I was looking through the photos. It's blue with a blue carpeted interior and these silver pinstripes in the back hatch. Oh my goodness, it's beautiful. We then moved to the DB Mark III, which was a really hardcore version of the DB2 with between 162 and 178 brake horsepower. This car was James Bond's in the 1959 Ian Fleming novel Goldfinger. The official DB3 was a race car. 10 years into the DB lineup in 1958, we reached the DB4. This car had a 3.7-liter straight 6 engine with 240 brake horsepower, which was fast in the late 1950s. The DB4 could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 9 seconds and had a top speed of 140. And buyers could choose between a 4-speed manual and a 3-speed automatic transmission. Other variants of the DB4 also debuted, including a GT model and a convertible. In 1963 came the Bond car, the Aston Martin DB5, which had a 4-liter straight 6. This car made 282 brake horsepower and went from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 7.1 seconds. In the 1960s, this car was huge for Aston Martin, and it sealed its place in history with its use in the James Bond film Goldfinger. You see a lot of silver Aston Martins, just like this one, and that's because it's a Bond car. The Aston Martin-James Bond relationship was hugely successful, and today they're pretty synonymous with each other. But James Bond almost didn't drive an Aston Martin. The story is that producers wanted him to drive a Jaguar E-Type, but when they reached out to Jaguar, Jaguar said no. So they reached out to Aston Martin. And the story is that David Brown was also hesitant to give them a car, but he eventually did, and it ended up being a historic decision. The DB6 of the late 1960s was very similar to the DB5, except it had a higher roofline, a longer wheelbase, and different bumpers. And a car called the DBS came out in 1967, and it was a huge departure styling-wise from its DB siblings. The DBS was supposed to have an all-new V8, but the engine wasn't ready by the time the car launched, so it ended up having a straight 6 and a V8 during its lifetime. And around the time DBS production ended in 1972, David Brown sold Aston Martin. We went 2 decades between Brown's sale and the 1993 introduction of the Aston Martin DB7, whose iconic look was the work of famous automotive designer Ian Callum. But this was an interesting car because when Ford acquired Aston Martin in the early 1990s, Aston was not doing very well financially. Ford also owned Jaguar, and the company figured it would be cheaper and easier to build a DB7 from Jaguar parts than something all new. So the DB7 was built on the Jaguar XJS platform, and it had a supercharged straight 6 with 355 brake horsepower. A 420 horsepower V12 came later, and the success of the DB7 helped rejuvenate Aston Martin as the 21st century approached. That brings us to this car, the Aston Martin DB9, which debuted in 2003 with an even more powerful V12. Aston Martin said that this car was such an improvement over the DB7 that to call it a DB8 would be inappropriate. So they skipped the number entirely and went to DB9. This DB9 in particular has a 6.0-liter V12 with 450 horsepower, and that power goes to the rear wheels through a 6-speed automatic transmission. Kennan's video talks about the design and engineering of the car, and I will have our team link it somewhere on the screen so that you can open it and save it for later. And some things to note from that video are that the DB9's body shell is 25% lighter than the DB7's. And this V12 right here is not 2 Ford Duratec V6s put together. Kennan will tell you tons more about that in his video, and I hope you go watch it and enjoy it. Ian Callum also designed the DB9, and he outdid himself. This car is still so beautiful 20 years later. And the first thing you notice after you get over the initial shock of the fact that you're looking at a DB9 and it's beautiful is the fact that it is so simple yet so perfect. The hood lines stretch all the way to the grille, so there's no line cutting off the flow of this shape. Even the lines themselves on the edge of the hood line up so well with the headlights and the overall shape of the car. The grille is so classy. The shape of the side is so classy. The back is so classy. I mean, it's such a good looking car. You can't deny it. And the success of this car, which it was very, very successful, led to the DB10, the new age DBS, the DB11, and the DB12, which is currently on sale. This car was a big deal for Aston Martin, and it is a big deal that I get to drive it today. Another beautiful thing about the DB9 is that it has swan doors. So when I open this, it goes up. I won't hit any curbs, and I just look so elegant, and my car is so beautiful because it opens slightly upward. Not way up, not out, gently upward. Oh, how nice. I have now made my way to the back of the DB9, which is actually pretty deceiving. You look at this car from the side or the back, and you think, that has a huge hatchback trunk. Nah, this guy has 2 rear seats, so the trunk is pretty small. And I would say the thing that keeps me from fully storing myself in here is the fact that I'm not flexible enough to bend my knees in. And if I were to bring this trunk down, I'm not flexible enough to close it, most likely. Oh, I actually think that would close, but I'm by myself in a parking lot, so I'm not gonna fully close it, but I'll show you how close I'm willing to get. Oh, that would totally close, yeah. Success. The DB9 trunk is one Alanis unit. Inside this car is so elegant. We have the suede headliner, the wooden accents, the black leather that's been just nicely used to where it has all these loving creases on it. Just the sign of a car that's been driven and sat in and enjoyed, and oh, I just love it. We have the analog clock right here, which, you know, that's what you get when you buy fancy cars. You get an analog clock in addition to digital clocks, but you know, analog, like our watches, right? We have the classic park, reverse, neutral, and drive buttons instead of a shifter, and they're right here within our reach. And in the middle of those buttons is the engine start button, which is in this nice case of just clear coat. And then you have the Aston Martin logo behind it, and it says engine start, and it just makes you feel so nice and fancy when you press it, and the V12 comes to life. Oh, what a car! The driver and the passenger are really, really separated by our center console area here, but everything just has places. You have the tiniest little cup holders here in the middle, which to me is a sign of days gone by, because you could not put a large Sonic drink in here. You could put like a little glass bottle of Coca-Cola in these cup holders. That's about all you're getting in them. You have a little rectangular spot right here, which is perfect, honestly, for your phone. All of the seat adjustments don't happen on the seat or under the seat. They happen on the side of this column here. So the driver adjusts their seat right here. The passenger does the same thing on the other side. And then, like I said, when I was in the trunk, that's a normal line to say, we have two rear seats. Now, rear seats in Grand Tours are often not actual seats. They're purse shelves, but those are some pretty nice purse shelves. And the hilarious thing about these Grand Tours as they age with the tiny little back seats is the front seats are worn and loved and creased. And the back seats, if you showed me those seats, I would think that they were on a brand new model in the showroom. No one has been sitting in those seats except for the purses, which is what that area is meant for. This car has a lot of buttons, but I feel like they're stacked and organized really, really well. It's not overwhelming when you look at it. It doesn't look cheap or bad. They're placed in the right spots to make you just feel like, sure, there's a lot going on here, but it's elegant and I paid for it, so there should be a lot going on here. Now I think it's time to drive the Aston Martin DB9. But I started this video before I started driving, and I did that for a reason. So the quirks of this car start before you start driving, and we begin with the key. The key doesn't look like your normal car or house or whatever key. It's this little cylindrical thing that you put in the ignition, and then you turn on the electronics. So I have to find the ignition, hold on. All right, so the electronics are on. The engine is not on, but I use my engine start button in the center here. Oh, there it is. This is so exciting. Oh my goodness. I haven't driven this yet, and I'm so excited to drive it, and I'm gonna keep my sunglasses on because today was the eclipse. Yeah, hi from like 3 weeks ago. Today was the eclipse, and it's really, really bright outside, so I think it's safer if I drive with my sunglasses. Yay, let's go. Oh, this is exciting. Something I forget when I'm driving older supercars is I'm waiting to use the noseless system in case I need to go over a bump or a dip or something, and nope, we just gotta be careful in here. I immediately noticed driving this car that it does drive like it's a couple of decades old. I can definitely feel the things on the road. They're not bothersome. You can just, you know they're there. You know when you go over a bump or something like that. And you can also hear when you go over these bumps and things. But it ultimately rides pretty nice, and the steering, just the inputs are so smooth and wonderful and Grand Toury-like. We have a V12 up front. We have a giant engine up here that makes 450 horsepower. But when I'm driving through this neighborhood, it's pretty quiet, right? Like, it's not super loud. It's not just roaring at everybody. I mean, I could put it in sport mode. No, still pretty polite. Nothing super scary. It's definitely a grand tour. I mean, you can hear it kick on like a little bit going through the neighborhood in sport mode, but yeah, it's ultimately very nice and luxurious and peaceful. I would have never survived before phones to navigate, because I realized I didn't look up where the highway was before I got in here. I couldn't follow road signs to save my life. Like, if my life depended on it, if I had to get out of a bad situation using only road signs, it would be rough. I don't know that I would succeed. The gas pedal is very light and airy under your foot. It really does put emphasis on the grand touring part of this car. I mean, there's not that tension there to go, oh, I'm in a scary car. This is very light and airy and relaxing, you know? It's not meant to be terrifying. It's meant to just be chill. We're going for a drive. We're gonna look nice in our Aston. There was someone in front of me at the highway entrance because I wanted to floor it, and I started to floor it and I was like, no, this is not gonna work out. I need to go to the next highway entrance. But you could feel the car start to get geared up. You know, when you're in a car that's just like calm and chill and GT, and then you put your foot down and it starts getting ready to go. Oh, that's what it did. And so now I'm getting ready to go. That puts some power down. As horsepower gets higher and all these automakers compete in the horsepower wars, and they're like, my car makes 800, my car makes 2000, like the Rimac Nevera, my car has instant torque, my car does this. Power becomes less important, right? And power becomes less impactful. It's the way a car puts the power down, and also the feelings you get from that power, the nostalgia you get from that power. And when I press the power in this car, sure, it's 450, you know, like, it is not the wildest power output in the world, but the way it puts the power down and the way it sounds and the way it makes me feel, that is what matters. Okay. I've made a lot of like noises in this video, and that's because like I'm just really excited and I'm just really having fun. Kennan drove a DB9 with an auto recently, and I looked at that and I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't drive a DB9 because everybody's gonna say Kennan just drove a DB9. It is so worth it to have multiple people drive this car and tell you how they feel about it, because I'm having the time of my life. Wow, I'm having so much fun. Whoever buys this car is gonna be having the time of their life, and you know what? Good for them. So that was the 2007 Aston Martin DB9. This car is amazing, and it's no wonder it made such a mark on Aston Martin's history and on the car industry in general. And if you think this car is as amazing as I do, it is now available on Cars and Bids. You can check out more photos, see the full spec list, or maybe even bid on it at the link in the description of this video. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.